In this video we're going to take a quick look at the new resource map feature of Serverless360. To start with, you can see that I've got in my Azure subscription here, there's a couple of different resource groups. Now I've got the same application deployed for dev, test and production in the three middle resource groups here. So if we have a quick look, you can see that I've got quite a few resources in here. We've got app services, content delivery network, event hubs, event grids, and a whole bunch of different types of resources. And this represents a small scale version of many companies where we've got lots of resources. They may be in different resource groups, different subscriptions, and the thing is that they're deployed in a way that represents the best physical deployment architecture. Now, what we want to be able to do is try and work out how we manage these resources and understand the layout and landscape of what these resources look like, bearing in mind that we've got dev, test and production. We've got the fact that some resources, so for example an app service, we may have a dev, test and production version of that same app service. So in Serverless360, if you start at the home page, you'll see we've got a new area here called resource map, and the idea is that in the scope section you'd build a representation of your organization's estate. So for Acme here, you can see we've got applications, we've got an integration area with some interfaces and some platform services, and this tree can build out to represent what your landscape looks like. And the idea is that you'll bring the resources from Azure and you'll position them within that landscape. And then if we take an example, if we look at the Fit app here, I've got environments, so I've got dev, test and production environments, and I'll be able to build out a map over here, which you'll see when I start bringing the resources in, where we'll represent matching the resources together to say these are the same resource, but here's the dev, test and production version of that. Now, in the interest of time for the demonstration today, I'm going to show the automation approach, where in the resources section we've got the ability to define some rules that help us build out, automate some of the manual work that we could do. So in this case here, you can see I've got 107 resources that I've already brought in from my various demos. I've ignored all those resources because I'm not interested in those for today. What I'm going to look to do is bring in some new resources from this Azure subscription over here that I haven't brought in previously. So if we go and sync these resources, and you'll see that Serverless360 will bring them in. You can have auto sync turned on, so it'll bring in new resources every night, and what it'll do is it'll allocate resources based on the rules. So you can see my resources jumped right up to 186, and over in the scopes you'll find that these ones that were black before have now lit up as green. So what I did was, in my production setup, dev setup and test setup, I applied some tags to the resources. So here you can see I've got 3 tags: environment, logical resource name and scope path. And the scope path was used when we imported the resources to decide where in this tree that resource would live. The logical resource, so this will help me if we go and look at the platform section and the resource assignment. You can see I've got a list of logical resources here. So we've got an event grid, an event hub, a key vault, etc. And that logical resource tag told me which resource type that is, or which kind of logical resource. Then the environment tag was used to tell me which of these boxes it goes in. And what I've really ended up doing is I've decided that these 3 event grid instances are all the same thing. It's just dev, test and production versions of each one. So you can see we've got the dev one, which came from the dev resource group over here. So you'll be able to see we've got that over in here somewhere. And then we've got the production one that we'll see down here somewhere, and the test one would be the equivalent. So what we've been able to do is kind of build a cross-tab view of these resources, being able to say these are all the same logical resource, which makes sense for your logical architecture, and the physical resources are just cross-tabbed across this grid. So if you're sort of trying to bring an existing Azure estate under this structure, you can either bring everything in manually, which we'll show in future demo videos, and you can kind of assign things to a scope. you can assign things to an environment and that kind of thing, and you can do that through the grid here, or also in the resources list at a scope level. Once you've assigned everything into your tree structure to the right environment and to the right logical resource, we can then start doing things like analysing the costs. So here, if you see, I'm looking at the platform node, and I can start getting some visualizations of what my cost looks like. So probably a better example would have been on the Fit app one, where we've actually got some ongoing costs, because I think the platform one's all consumption and it's not been used yet. So up here on the Fit app one, we should see some cost visualization starting to show up now. So you can see my total cost $64. You can see there's a breakdown, so I can look and see what resources have spent what money. I can get a table view of this, so I can see, how things have been, what things have spent what money. I can get things like an overall view for the cost of the resources over a period of time, and I can do things like filter it. So we start being able to do analysis at the scope level, and then we start being able to look at things like the environments within that scope. So this starts giving us a logical architecture focused cost analysis instead of a physical one, which we have in Azure. The idea is that once we start having a good understanding of the landscape and what we have in Azure, we can then start breaking out and doing more advanced features around this with serverless. So on our roadmap for this feature, we'll be including possible security things, possible guidance things, and deeper cost analysis, and we'll try to kind of relate this to people's logical architectures, so you can manage, have like a full sort of traceability from your production, dev and test physical architecture back to the solution logical architecture. And this will let you break it down into things like, from an organizational perspective, you might have the owner of your Azure brings resources in and allocates them to somewhere in the tree. So for example, I could take this resource here, I could go and sort of indicate where it lives, and then what I might do is I might say my Azure owner looks after this bit, but then my integration manager might look after from the integration platform down, and he could basically reallocate resources to subscopes. And the idea is that if you manage it at this level, green means everything's good, and if I do something like, let's say I assign this resource here to integration node, and I go back to the scopes, you'll see my integration flags up as red because there's one resource here that hasn't been allocated, and I need to actually figure out where that lives and what to do with it. So here I'll actually be able to see, the idea is that I can actually sort of manage the governance of my environment by seeing that I've got some work to do in the integration area, and I just get everything green means I've got everything mapped, and and if any new resources get created, they'll sort of get allocated accordingly. So that's a really quick intro to resource map. I hope it sort of gets across the point of being able to be organized and kind of get on top of your Azure estate and put some logical structure to it to make things easy to manage and govern. And I hope that you can get a view of what we think our roadmap's going to be in this area and how it can help customers become more organized and have a sort of take away some of the complexity of their very large estate. Thanks for listening.